The folding chair in the corner of the banquet hall had a crack running down the left leg, patched with silver duct tape that someone had tried to hide under a white tablecloth draped too far over the edge. Nobody had noticed it all evening. Nobody noticed me either. That was the point. My name badge said Elena, which was true enough. Elena Vasquez, event staff, hired through the hotel's temporary staffing agency 3 months ago when Hartwell Capital's annual gala planning committee sent over their requirements. Black uniform, hair pinned back, invisible unless someone needed a champagne refill or a dirty plate cleared. I'd been standing near that cracked folding chair for 4 hours, and in 4 hours, not a single one of the 200 guests had looked me in the eye. Not my boss's husband, who had downed 6 glasses of Bordeaux, and was now loudly explaining cryptocurrency to a woman half his age who clearly wanted to be anywhere else. Not my boss herself, Catherine Hartwell, who'd swept past me 3 times without a glance, her diamonds catching the chandelier light like she'd been engineered specifically to make other women feel small. And certainly not Richard Crane, the CEO of Hartwell Capital, who had spent the last 20 minutes standing near the ice sculpture of the company logo, holding court with 4 men I recognized from the SEC filing I'd reviewed last Tuesday. I refilled a water glass. I didn't need to refill, just to drift closer. The pension reallocation goes through on Monday, Richard was saying, his voice low, but not low enough. He had the confidence of a man who had never once considered that a woman carrying a water pitcher might understand finance. Legal cleared it this morning. 11,000 employees, Tier 2 and below. They'll get the notification in their portals. One of the men, the one I knew was the CFO, based on his LinkedIn photo, shifted his weight. The unions are going to push back. Let them. By the time they organize, the funds have already been reclassified. It's all perfectly structured. Richard smiled the smile of someone who had confused intelligence with impunity for so long that the two had become the same thing in his mind. The board approved it. The lawyers blessed it. And by Monday evening, $240 million in pension obligations disappear from our liability column. And the employees get what the new structure allows, which is considerably less than they were promised, but considerably more than nothing. He shrugged, lifting his champagne. Business is adjustment. Gentlemen, the people who understand that are the ones standing in this room. The people who don't are the ones standing outside it. He didn't even glance in my direction. I set the water pitcher down on the tray of a passing colleague, pulled out my phone, and sent a single text to my attorney. Monday is too long. Move it to tonight. My phone buzzed back in under a minute. Are you sure? I looked around the room, at the ice sculpture, at the chandelier, at the folding chair with its cracked leg and its duct tape patch that nobody had noticed because nobody looked at the things that served them. I'm sure, I typed back. Tell Marcus to come in. I had 20 minutes. I used them well. I circulated through the room with my water pitcher the way I had every night for 3 months. Unhurried, unremarkable, listening. My boss had given a speech earlier about Hartwell Capital's commitment to its people. She'd said the word family 4 times. I'd counted. She'd also, 2 weeks ago, signed the internal memo authorizing the pension reallocation, which I had photographed with my phone while delivering coffee to the executive suite and pretending to struggle with the door handle. Catherine found me near the dessert table at the 40-minute mark, which surprised me. She never usually sought out staff. Elena, she said, and there was something performative about the way she used my name. The way people sometimes use service workers' names to demonstrate that they are the kind of person who uses service workers' names. The past appetizers ran out too quickly in the East Wing. Can you make sure that doesn't happen in the second hour? Of course, I said. She started to turn away, then paused. She looked at me with the brief, analytical expression of someone who has just experienced a flicker of recognition they can't place. I'd seen it before. It happened every few weeks. Usually when I walked into a room at a certain angle, or when the light caught my face in a way that reminded someone of someone. Have we met before? She asked. Outside of here, I mean. I don't think so, I said pleasantly. I have one of those faces. She moved on. She wasn't entirely wrong to feel that flicker. My mother had worked for Hartwell Capital for 31 years. She'd started in the mailroom at 22 and worked her way to senior operations manager. The kind of title that sounds impressive until you realize it comes with a pension promise and very little else. My mother had been in that building every weekday for 3 decades. She'd organized the holiday drives, trained 7 different classes of junior staff, covered shifts when people called in sick, and genuinely, in a way that I found both admirable and heartbreaking, loved her job. They had let her go 18 months ago, 3 years before her full vesting date, in a restructuring that had, by coincidence, eliminated exactly the positions that would have triggered the largest pension obligations. She had received 2 weeks of severance and a form letter. She had not cried in front of me when she called to tell me. She had cried later, when she thought I wasn't listening, in her kitchen, making tea, when she thought the sound of the kettle would cover it. It didn't. I had been building Vasquez Holdings quietly for 7 years, the way you build things when you don't want anyone to notice, through subsidiaries, through acquisitions structured to look like routine commercial real estate deals, through patient accumulation of exactly the kind of financial leverage that people like Richard Crane assumed people like me could never access. My mother thought I ran a small property management company. I had let her think that. It was easier than explaining that I had spent the better part of a decade positioning myself to walk into the room where her career had been ended and own everything in it. I had bought Hartwell Capital's primary office building 14 months ago through a shell company called Meridian Real Estate Holdings. I had acquired their largest outstanding line of credit 6 months later through a Luxembourg-based investment vehicle that, on paper, had no connection to a woman named Elena Vasquez who sometimes worked events at this hotel. I now held the deed to the building where 11,000 people worked, and I held the note on $260 million in debt that was due for renewal in 48 hours. I had also, 3 months ago, documented every material misrepresentation Hartwell Capital had made to its pension fund trustees, and handed that documentation to a forensic accountant named Marcus Webb, who had in turn handed it to the appropriate regulatory authorities. Marcus was in the lobby now. I knew because my phone buzzed again. "We're here. Ready when you are." I set down my tray. I unpinned my hair. I walked to the edge of the banquet hall, where the staff entrance met the main floor, and I waited. It took 4 minutes. I know because I watched the clock above the bar, the one shaped like a compass that Catherine had apparently shipped from an estate sale in Connecticut, because the details of this room had become as familiar to me as my own apartment over 3 months of standing in it invisibly. The doors opened. Marcus walked in first, which was not protocol, but Marcus had never been particularly interested in protocol. Behind him were 2 people I recognized, a woman from the financial industry, regulatory authority, and a man from the Department of Labor's Employee Benefits Security Administration, both of whom I had met in conference rooms that looked nothing like this one. Behind them were 2 more people I didn't recognize but whose general bearing, careful, observant, slightly overdressed for a Friday evening, suggested they were exactly what they appeared to be. Richard saw Marcus first and frowned, the frown of a man who runs a firm and expects to know everyone in any room connected to his firm. He didn't know Marcus. He started to turn away. Marcus scanned the room. "Miss Vasquez." His voice carried, not loudly, not aggressively, just with the precise projection of someone who had been a litigator for 22 years and knew how to fill a room. "Elena Vasquez. We need a moment." 200 people looked up. Conversations paused the way they do when something breaks the expected frequency of a social event, when something happens that doesn't belong. I stepped forward from the edge of the room. Catherine turned. She looked at Marcus. She looked at the people behind him. She looked at me. And I watched the exact moment the flicker became recognition. "That's the," she started. "Elena Vasquez," I confirmed, walking toward Marcus with the same unhurried pace I'd used all evening, carrying water pitchers and clearing plates. Though in other contexts, I go by the name on the lease for this building, the debt facility agreement, and the regulatory filing that was submitted to the EBSA at 4:15 this afternoon. I paused, which is also Elena Vasquez, as it turns out. The room had gone very quiet. Richard set down his champagne glass. It made a small sound in the silence. "I don't understand what's happening," he said, slowly, the way people speak when they understand exactly what's happening and are performing confusion while they calculate their options. "Meridian Real Estate Holdings," Marcus said, "which holds the deed to the Hartwell Capital headquarters building, the Westfield Office Park, and 2 parking structures on Clement Avenue, is a wholly owned subsidiary of Vasquez Holdings. Vasquez Holdings is a privately held company. Miss Vasquez is the sole shareholder." He produced a folder from under his arm. The thin, precise kind of folder that only ever contains things you cannot argue with. Additionally, the debt facility extended to Hartwell Capital by Clearwater Investment Partners, which comes due for renewal at 9 a.m. on Sunday, is also, as of 11 months ago, an asset of Vasquez Holdings. The CFO had gone the color of old chalk. "You're the landlord," Catherine said. It came out almost like a question. "I'm also your largest creditor," I said, "which means that when I decline to renew the debt facility on Sunday, which I intend to do, the resulting technical default will trigger a review of all financial representations Hartwell Capital has made to its institutional investors over the past 4 years." I looked at Richard. Starting with the pension fund, the woman from FINRA stepped forward and introduced herself. The man from the Department of Labor followed. The two people I didn't recognize, I now understood, were from the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, which Marcus had arranged without telling me because he knew I would have said it was too much, and he had decided it wasn't. "Mr. Crane," the man from the Department of Labor said, "we'll need to speak with you and your board regarding the pension reallocation currently scheduled for Monday morning. We've reviewed the documentation provided and we have significant concerns about compliance with ERISA fiduciary obligations." "What documentation?" Richard said. He turned to look at me. I had no particular expression on my face. I had practiced not having a particular expression for 3 months, standing in this room, listening. "The memo you signed on October 14th, I said. "The legal opinion from your internal counsel dated October 9th, which appears to have been selectively edited before it was presented to the board. The trustee communications from August and September, in which the pension fund's projected obligations were materially misrepresented." I paused. "Also, the conversation you had, approximately 20 minutes ago near the ice sculpture, which I'm told was in proximity of 2 other witnesses who were not, as it turns out, part of your organization." Richard stared at me. His jaw was doing something complicated. "You've been here for 3 months, Catherine said. Her voice had changed. The performance of it was gone. What was underneath was something colder and more honest. 3 months carrying trays. 3 months, I confirmed. Your event coordinator uses the same staffing agency your building's facilities team uses for overflow. It wasn't difficult. And you're right that it was 3 months. I wanted to be certain I had everything." "You're nobody," Richard said. It came out sharper than I think he intended. That register that powerful people sometimes drop into when they feel the ground moving. When the version of events they've been living in starts losing resolution. "You work events. Your staff. I own the building you work in," I said quietly. "I hold the paper on your debt. I've spent 11 months documenting the financial crimes your firm has committed against 11,000 people who trusted your company with their retirement security." I looked at him steadily. "But thank you for the water. I heard what I needed to hear tonight near the ice sculpture. So I suppose we both got what we came for." Marcus touched my elbow gently. "Elena." I knew what he meant. The regulatory authorities had what they needed. My attorneys had what they needed. What happened next would happen in offices and courtrooms and federal filings. Not in a banquet hall, in front of 200 people with champagne flutes, no matter how satisfying that might feel. But there was one more thing. "Catherine," I said. She looked at me. "My mother's name is Rosa Vasquez. She worked in your operations department for 31 years. Senior operations manager, Building 3. The team that handled vendor relations and facilities coordination." I watched her face. "You signed her termination letter." Something moved across Catherine's expression. Not guilt, exactly. More like the discomfort of having a thing named that you have spent considerable effort not naming. "There were hundreds of terminations in that restructuring," she said. "I know. I have all of them." I reached into the small pocket at my hip, not the visible one, that was part of the uniform, the interior pocket I'd had added at a tailor's 3 months ago, specifically for this evening, and I produced a folded piece of paper. "This is a letter of reinstatement for every employee terminated in the 18-month restructuring that I believe was conducted in bad faith to avoid pension obligations. Hartwell Capital's HR department will receive the full list Sunday morning. Your new landlord and primary creditor will be expecting compliance as a condition of the renegotiated lease and debt terms, both of which I am prepared to offer at favorable rates to a company that demonstrates good faith remediation." The CFO made a sound that wasn't quite a word. "You can't just." Richard started. "I own the building," I said. I own the debt. I have a regulatory filing that's been active for 6 hours. And I have a very good attorney. I glanced at Marcus. I can do quite a lot. The man from the Department of Labor was already speaking quietly to one of his colleagues, both of them making notes. The woman from FINRA had stepped closer to the CFO, in a way that suggested the conversation she needed to have with him was going to begin shortly. My attorney had everything documented, filed, time-stamped, and backed up in 3 separate locations because that was what I paid him to be certain of. I looked around the banquet hall, at the champagne, at the ice sculpture, which had been melting slowly all evening and was now barely recognizable as the Hartwell logo it had started as, at the chandelier and the white tablecloths and the 200 faces turned toward me with the particular expression of people witnessing something they will be describing at dinner tables for years, at the folding chair in the corner with the cracked leg and the duct tape. I had noticed it, the first night I worked this event, at the September preview dinner for Hartwell Capital's top clients. One of the more junior catering staff had been directed to sit there during the pre-event briefing, while the senior staff took the chairs at the table. The cracked leg had wobbled. Nobody had mentioned it. Nobody had replaced it. I had thought about my mother's kitchen that night. I had thought about the sound of the kettle. I had sent the text that set the rest of this in motion the following morning. My phone lit up. My CFO, calling from Denver. I let it go to voicemail because there was one more call I needed to make first, and I stepped out through the service entrance into the corridor, where the noise of the banquet hall was muffled to a low-frequency hum, and I found my mother's name in my contacts. She picked up on the second ring, the way she always did, like she'd been waiting, which she probably had been, because I had told her this afternoon that tonight was the night, and she had made me promise to call. Mia. It's done, Mom. There was a silence on the line that lasted long enough to mean several things simultaneously. Then she exhaled. A long, slow exhale that I had heard before only once, when I was 8 years old and she'd found a lump in her arm that turned out to be nothing, that same sound of a body releasing something it had been holding without realizing. "How are you?" she asked. "I'm okay." I leaned against the corridor wall, in my black uniform, with my hair still unpinned from where I'd let it down 20 minutes ago. "I'm good, actually." "Did they?" She paused, and I could hear her finding the words carefully. "Were they what you expected?" I thought about Richard near the ice sculpture, about Catherine's flicker of recognition in the dessert line, about the CFO who'd shifted his weight and gone chalk pale, about the folding chair. "Yeah," I said. "They were exactly what I expected. And the people, the ones who, the Department of Labor has opened a formal inquiry. Marcus says the FINRA referral alone is significant. The pension reallocation won't go through Monday. The ones who were terminated, they're getting the reinstatement letters." I paused. "It's not everything, Mom. It's not all of it, and some of it will take years in courts, and there are things that can't be undone. But it's something real." She was quiet again. Then, "You didn't have to do all of this for me." "I know, and I meant it. I had done it for her, and I had done it for the 31 years she had given to a company that had calculated what it could take from her and taken it without looking at her face. I had done it for every person on that termination list. I had done it because the version of the world where you could do that to people who trusted you and faced no consequence was a version of the world I did not accept. But mostly, honestly, in the part of myself I don't often let into conversations, I had done it for the sound of the kettle. "Are you coming home this weekend?" she asked. "Sunday," I said. "I'll make breakfast." I ended the call and stood in the corridor for a moment, just breathing. My CFO's voicemail would be about the press, because the press had likely already been tipped off, possibly by one of the 200 people in the banquet hall who had all been on their phones for the last 30 minutes. The Wall Street Journal's finance desk had my attorney's number. The story of how Hartwell Capital's event staff turned out to be their landlord and primary creditor would write itself, and it would write itself loudly, and there would be months of aftermath, legal, regulatory, corporate that would require careful management and a great deal of my time. I was ready for all of it. I walked back through the service entrance. The banquet hall was a different room than the one I had left 7 minutes ago. The formal arrangement of the evening had dissolved into something more agitated, guests clustering in small groups, staff standing uncertainly at the edges, Richard and Catherine and the CFO speaking with the regulatory officials in the corner, near the bar that was no longer serving anyone. The ice sculpture was a puddle of water in a silver tray. Marcus was waiting for me just inside the door. "Your car's outside," he said. "You should go. Let the process run." In a minute, I walked back to the corner of the room, to the folding chair with the cracked leg. I stood there for a moment, looking at the duct tape patch that no one had thought to replace, that had been here for who knows how long, invisible because everything that serves is invisible until the moment it isn't. One of the junior catering staff came to stand nearby, unsure whether to speak, and then spoke anyway. "Miss Vasquez, are you all right? Do you need anything?" "I'm fine," I said. "Thank you." I looked at her. She was young, early 20s, with the expression of someone who'd been standing in rooms like this for hours and had developed the specific professional stillness that the work requires. "What's your name?" She seemed surprised to be asked. "Danny." "Danny, this chair." I pointed to the folding chair. "Who do I talk to about having it replaced?" She blinked. "I mean, it's the hotel's event inventory, so probably the facilities coordinator." But she paused. "You're the one who owns the building." "Not this building," I said. "But the principle stands." I looked at the chair one more time. "Actually, don't replace it. Fix the leg. Replace the tape with something that holds properly. Put it back here. Sometimes the things that have been overlooked are the ones worth keeping." Danny nodded slowly, with the careful expression of someone filing something away for later consideration. My phone had 8 notifications. I turned toward the door, toward Marcus, toward the car outside, and the months of work ahead and the Sunday morning breakfast with my mother in her kitchen, where the kettle would boil, and the sound of it would mean something different now. I paused at the door. From here, the banquet hall looked the way places look when you're leaving them for the last time, and you know it a little smaller, a little more ordinary. The grandeur of the chandeliers and the mahogany and the Hartwell ice puddle reduced to what it actually was. A room. Just a room. Rooms didn't have power. People moved through them, and some of those people assumed the room was theirs, and some of those people stood quietly at the edge with water pitchers, and the assumption about which one had power was the thing that kept getting broken open, over and over, every time someone made the mistake of deciding that invisible meant inconsequential. My mother had been invisible in that operations office for 31 years. She had known every vendor, every facilities contact, every building protocol, every person's name. She had kept things running the way things only run when someone cares about them. They had let her go with a form letter. I had let them believe, for 3 months, that I was nobody. Because the best way to understand what a company truly isn't to sit at the head of its table. It's to stand at the edge of its room, doing the work no one notices, listening to the things people say when they think no one is listening. I had heard everything I needed to hear. "Ready?" Marcus said. "Ready," I said. Outside, the night air was cold and clean after the warm press of the banquet hall. My car was at the curb, my driver waiting with the particular practiced calm of someone who had driven me to and from events for 4 years and knew that tonight was different without having to be told. I got in. The city moved past the windows. I thought about Monday morning, about 11,000 emails landing in 11,000 inboxes, except the ones that wouldn't because the reallocation had been stopped, about the reinstatement letters going out Sunday, about my mother reading hers, sitting in her kitchen, the kettle on the stove behind her. I thought about a folding chair with a cracked leg and silver duct tape sitting in a corner of a banquet hall that had held every version of this story at once. The version where power is something you're born into, the version where it's something you take, and the one I had spent 7 years building toward, where it's something you earn in the quiet, in the invisible hours, in the rooms where no one thinks to look. My phone buzzed. A text from my mother. "Proud of you, Mija. Drive safe." I held the phone for a moment in the dark of the back seat, watching the city scroll past. "Thank you, Mom," I typed back, "for everything. I'll see you Sunday." I put the phone away, closed my eyes for a moment, let the motion of the car carry me forward. The work that came next would be harder in some ways than the 3 months of standing invisibly in that room. Harder than the 7 years of patient positioning before that. The courts would take time. The regulatory processes would take time. Some of what had been taken could be restored, and some of it couldn't. And learning to hold that clearly, without letting it become bitterness, would require ongoing work of a different kind. But the pension fund would be protected. The people on that list would get their letters. The company that had calculated what it could take from my mother from all of them and taken it without looking at anyone's face, would now be looked at very closely by people whose job it was to look closely, and what they found would matter. It had mattered from the beginning. I had just needed them to understand that. The car moved through the night. The city hummed around it. Somewhere in a banquet hall behind me, a folding chair sat in the corner with its cracked leg and its tape, waiting to be fixed properly by someone who had finally noticed it was there. That was enough. For tonight, that was more than enough.